Hi, everybody. Welcome to Astrology, the astrology of I Am. And today we have a very, very special edition of our show. It's special to me because I have the privilege and the honor of sharing with you a master astrologer. A master astrologer who has been in the business for over 40 years and who has done readings for over 10,000 people. So if you love astrology and if you love good information, solid information, and if you're a nerd, an astrology geek like I am, or if you just love good information and knowledge, this interview is going to be inspirational for you. And so I want to introduce to some and represent to others none other than Master Astrologer James Braha. Please allow yourself to digest this interview. It's longer than most, but it'll be worth it, especially if you love astrology. So check out this interview and I will say something on the other side. James Braha, brother BP. Man, so good to see you.
Thank you.
My goodness. So our relationship goes back to 1998 when you literally, no exaggeration, literally changed the direction of my life. And I have said it before, but I have to start this interview by honoring you and acknowledging you for being a master astrologer and a kind person.
Thank you. The latter of which is way more important, by the way.
Well, I know for sure when I came to you as a client in 1998, I was at a crossroads in my life and I didn't know what to do. And what stands out in my mind more than anything is I started to talk as I am wont to do. I talk too much.
And that doesn't work.
And you stopped me in mid-sentence before I could tell you too much about my chart. And you said, look, I don't want you second guessing me. I want to tell you what the chart says.
Right.
Then you can ask questions.
What good is it? What good is it if a person tells me that, they want to be a writer? And then I tell them, wow, your chart is fantastic. You should be a writer. What good is it?
Exactly. So, yeah. And that's what was a blessing to me, because you literally affirmed what I felt was my true path and my calling, but I was under a lot of pressure to deviate and go into a different direction.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember.
And so you have been a part of my journey. I also want to thank you for taking me on as a sometime student, although I will never be who you are as a great astrologer.
Don't say that.
No, I mean the Vedic. In fact, that's the first question I want to get to. After I ask this question, I just want to briefly show everyone. I have several of your books right here. I have How to Be a Great Astrologer, How to Forecast the Future, How to Predict the Future,
right.
How to Be a Great Astrologer. I have The Art and Practice of Ancient Hindu Astrology.
Right.
And I also have one that is old, but you have re-edited it and made it more, you brought it into the 21st century, Ancient Hindu Astrology for the Modern Western Astrologer.
Yeah, it's now the revised and expanded 2020 edition.
Wow.
And when I started, the way that this happened, and by the way, that Art and Practice, I also have the revised edition. I mailed you a copy of that.
Oh, nice. Thank you.
I did mail you a copy, right?
Of Art and Practice?
Yeah, the revised edition.
No.
All right, my memory is gone. I'll send you both.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Anyway, yeah. So about 3 or 4 years ago, I realized I needed to get my books on ebooks. And in order to do that, I wanted to revise them because they were written a long time ago. So I spent actually a year. I didn't intend to spend a year updating that original. My first book was Ancient Hindu Astrology for the Modern Western Astrologer. I was just going to update it. I knew it would take maybe 5 or 6 months. It took a year. So it's completely redone. In fact, you saw the review that came in. It said, this is a new book. So it's a revised edition. Anyway.
Great review.
So what do you want to talk about?
Well, first thing is the nature of the two systems. You practice in Jyotish or Vedic astrology, which is an astrology that has roots that go back thousands of years, mainly in or originally in India. And it's a system that is different from the Western so-called tropical system. And it's a more predictive system. I'm going to ask you a challenging question first, then we'll get into the whole difference between the two zodiacs. The big question that a lot of people want to know about astrology is, and this is not just for Vedic or Jyotish, it's for astrology across the board. Why did so many astrologers not accurately predict the global pandemic?
The ultimate reason, in my opinion, is that mundane astrology means the astrology of countries and the astrology of the world. That's called, as opposed to the personal astrology that we do, or horary astrology, where you predict, they ask a question and you draw a chart. So if there was any mundane astrologer that was consistently good, the entire world would know about them, and they would be wealthy. They could predict wars. They could predict this. They could predict that. In fact, the greatest mundane astrologer that I remember in my lifetime was Jean Dixon. However, Jean Dixon in the 60s and the 70s, she predicted these magnificent things that were accurate, but she predicted way more that didn't happen. In fact, in 1956, she said the president of 1960 would be a Democrat and would die in office. By the time the election came along, she changed her mind and said Richard Nixon will win. Changed her mind. Anyway, I was just writing about this. I'm writing a book now called the Braha Sutras, Vedic Astrology, the Braha Sutras. And I was writing about this business of mundane astrology. And I went to Wikipedia because I wanted to get some information about Jean Dixon. And there was a mathematician who coined the term the Jean Dixon effect. The Jean Dixon effect is where the person promotes the predictions they got right, and they don't tell you that they got way more wrong. Now, why is it so difficult to predict for the world? Because we don't have a birth date and a birth time for the world, so there are no houses. Okay? Now, there are things that are wonderfully predictive when a planet goes into a sign. When Pluto went into Leo, I forget the year, there were 1939, I think, it was the films that came out that year when Pluto went into Leo. It was like Gone with the Wind, The Wizard of Oz. There were these, it was like the greatest year of film. When Pluto went into Sagittarius, we had the O.J. Simpson affair. And this means that every day people were watching a lawsuit. Pluto in Sagittarius, the sign of law. And so those things.
And can I also say that during that time, we also had the Catholic Church scandal.
Okay, I didn't know that. So there are things like this. There's also, when Uranus went into Taurus in the tropical zodiac, I thought my time has come, a new currency. Taurus is money. Uranus in Taurus, I said, gold is going to come up now. You know what happened instead? Bitcoin. Suddenly, when Uranus hit, it wasn't sudden, because when a planet enters a sign, it's astrologically, it's difficult to know the exact, so it can be within a year, it can be within 6 months or a year. Anyway, those things are fairly predictable. A major planet goes into a sign, and some things happen for the world. But the other stuff is near impossible. Most astrologers don't want to hear this because they're constantly making these predictions. I used to go to the Vedic Astrology conferences in the 1990s, and every year there was a speech about predictions for the year. And after about 7, 8 years, I realized this is garbage. They almost never happen. And people are predicting a stock market crash. They predicted a stock market crash 6 times before it happened. So when you don't have the birth time, you don't have a horoscope, basically. Now, I just wrote in the Braha Sutras just the other day. It's funny you asked this question. I was just writing about trying to tell people to stop trying to make worldly predictions and letting people think that it can be done consistently, because it can't. And I tell them, in order to get this message so that it doesn't take you 10 years, and most people, even 10 years, they'll keep believing it even though the results aren't there. So I tell them in the book, I say, draw a horoscope for February 3rd, 1962, and look at what you're going to see. You're going to see all, now forgetting about Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, because those are outer planets.
Right.
In the Hindu system, we're just using Western. Even if you use those, it's okay. But all of the personal planets and the South Node are in, look how imbalanced this horoscope is. So you've got Sun, Moon, Mercury, Saturn, Venus, Jupiter. You have all the planets in that one sign. One of them goes to Capricorn or something. If I do it from the Hindu system, it's even more bizarre because they're not using Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And look at this, all of those planets, right? Now, if that's not the most imbalanced horoscope you have ever seen in your life, I don't know what is. And guess what happened after February 3rd, 1962? Nothing. Nothing. Okay. Now, you could say, wait a minute, the Cuban Missile Crisis happened, but it was 8 months later. And please tell me, so the astrologer sees, in the Hindu system, they see 8 of the 9 influences that they use, because they don't use Uranus. They see 8 of the 9 influences in Capricorn. How is that going to make them think a worldwide crisis, war? I'm sorry, but that mundane astrology. Now, if you're very psychic, sometimes you can do it, but that's why the pandemic. And when people ask me about the pandemic, 8 months ago, they said, what's going to happen? I said, it's very easy to know what's going to happen. Go to the astrologer that predicted the pandemic and ask them. And guess what? You won't find anybody that predicted it.
Well, I love your how do you say it? You actually have a Uranian approach, because you're saying, forget what everyone says. Let's see what works. But before we talk about that further, I just want to let you know that in 1962, something did happen that was really important. That was the year of my birth.
I noticed that when I saw your horoscope, 1962.
So who knows? Maybe. Okay. So you do have this approach of, and I love it, and I'm thankful for it, because your attitude is, I'm not going to stick with what the tradition, or not necessarily the tradition, but what the excuse me, my words are failing today, but you're not going to just believe what's been told. You're going to determine the value of an astrological assertion by whether or not it works.
That's right.
And that's kind of revolutionary, because there's so many people now who are just reading books and then repeating what's in the books, and they don't have a clear understanding of the complexity of this whole art. So let's just say, for clarity's sake, you've been doing this for
How
40
long?
years, 40 years.
40 years. And about
Since,
how many
since
charts have you read?
I started with Western astrology 4 or 5 years, then Hindu astrology 35 years. I've done at least 10,000 horoscopes. But let me show you this. I told you that I'm writing this book called the Vedic Astrology, the Braha Sutras,
I love that title.
which is little aphorisms, little pieces of truth. I have written 150 of these sutras, one of which was just what you asked about the mundane astrology. That's like number 140. The number one sutra here in the book is follow the 7 in 10 rule. Now, this is way more for Hindu astrology than it is for Western. If something doesn't work, because the Hindu astrology is all about making predictions, right? And knowing what's going to happen in a person's life. If some technique doesn't work 7 out of 10 times, do not use it. If it works 3 times out of 10, which there's a lot of techniques that don't work so well. They work once in a while. But this means that when you get 10 clients that have that, 7 of them are going to say, if you bother to ask them, and say, well, no, that's not really true. No, that didn't really happen. So that's the first one. The second one is speak only what you know. They ask you a question, you don't know the answer, you just say, I don't know. I can't see it. The third is define the purpose of astrology, of an astrology reading. But yes, you have to go by what works and get rid of the rest.
I love that's so refreshing in a world where you have, especially all of these, I hate to say it, but I have to say it, the young people who are getting into the field and they're reading what's on the internet and then they're repeating to clients what a certain description of an event or a planet or a circumstance.
This is very rough. One of the sutras, it's number 130 or something like that, is the sutra is the internet is the best, the internet is the worst.
Yes, indeed.
The worst part of it is anybody can set up a page and say, I'm an astrologer and teach garbage. So yeah, it's the older that I get, the more difficult the more difficult it becomes, because while my work is getting better and better because I stick to what works, and some astrologers are getting better and better because they're serious, there's so much garbage coming into the field now. It's really rough to watch.
Absolutely. So let's go back to some foundational questions. Like, tell us the difference between the Western tropical zodiac system and the Vedic astrological system.
I don't want to get real technical for people. I know they're not interested in that, but there's 2 zodiacs, and it's not that one is right and one is wrong. The tropical zodiac is based on the sun's position in relation to the other planets at the moment that spring begins. Spring doesn't begin, spring started yesterday, March 20th, but it didn't start March 20th. It started March 20th at 5:38 a.m. in a certain place. In another place, it would be maybe 6 o'clock. In other words, they take note of when spring begins. And the way they know how spring begins is the longest day of the year, the shortest day of the year, but they pinpoint it. And that's the zodiac that they use. Now, that particular zodiac means that you're not actually looking at planets and the constellations. So every 5 or 10 years, newspaper articles come out and they say, hey, people think their sun is Libra. They think their sun is this. But guess what? They're wrong. It's not, because when you take the precession of the equinox into effect, the precession of the equinox means this. There was a point where the tropical zodiac had 0 Aries right here. Absolutely. And the sidereal zodiac had 0 Aries right here. But 72 years later, the Earth moved 1 degree. So the point they called 0 Aries was now 29 Pisces. And as the years go by, now if you're looking at a Western, at a Hindu horoscope, you have to back up the chart approximately 24 degrees, because the zodiacs have gone away from each other because of the precession. It doesn't mean one zodiac is more accurate and the other is not. Now, the Western culture is different from the Indian culture. In the Indian culture, there's a caste system. If you're born a Shudra, a slave, you die a slave. If you, or the lower class, I don't know what they call it, the slave may not be the right word, but it's a very low class. If you're a Brahmin, then you're a knowledgeable Brahmin, and that's the best. If you're a warrior, so they have this caste system. So because of that, and because of the incredible poverty, they needed an astrology that was predictive, where they could say, even though the caste system keeps you in place, even though everybody's poor, this guy's going to get rich. This woman is going to rise above. So they have a more predictive system. At least that's how I see it. They are more concerned with, are you going to be wealthy? How many children? What's the dharma, the purpose, or the career? They're much more concerned with that. In the Western world, you have a peanut farmer who becomes a president, Jimmy Carter. You have Lyndon Johnson, who grew up without electricity. Actually, I think even Jimmy Carter grew up for the first 5 or 6 years without bathrooms. And I mean, they're both dirt poor, and yet they were able to get there. So you want an astrology over here where it allows for free will. It allows for the behavior. So if you look at Lyndon Johnson's chart, you see all these planets in the Hindu. You see them all in the sign of Leo, and you see somebody who is very, very, powerful and domineering and stuff. But it gives you the psychology. So it's a little bit more behavioral and psychological. The Hindu's a little bit more predictive. Now, before this session started, I asked you, do you play guitar? And you said no, because I wanted to use an analogy. So in my books, in my very first book, I said the Hindu Vedic system is predictive. How many children, how many marriages, what's the partner going to be like, how many brothers, all this sort of stuff. And the Western is more psychological. The person has Venus, Neptune, so they feel too much in love matters, or they have Venus, Uranus, so they need excitement and in marriage. It's a little more psychological and behavioral. And in the Western system, you see the person's experience of life. Okay, for example, I grew up in a household with a schizophrenic mother. Okay, so the childhood was just disastrous and dysfunctional. In my oldest brother and in my chart, the fourth house is extremely bad and problematic. Okay, and we suffered from this crazy mother. The middle brother in the Western chart has Moon conjunct Jupiter.
Wow.
in Jupiter's own sign, Sagittarius, right? In the house of mother. He had the same crazy mother, but it didn't have the effect on him. And in fact, we all met after we grew up. We were in New York City after we had gone to college and stuff. We were 25 or 30, whatever it was. And the oldest brother says to me, what happened to Charlie? He was in Disney World when we grew up. So the Western horoscope shows that he had a good experience of childhood. He'll tell you had a happy childhood. Oh my God. Not me and not my oldest sibling. But in the Hindu chart, you could see the same objective problems in the household for all three kids. Now, in my first book, I said, use what Hindu Vedic for predictive, use the Western for psychological, put them together. You got a great astrology. However, the Western astrology is quite capable of doing predictions. I would say it's not as good. It's harder. It's not as good. The other's better. And the Hindu is more predictive, but you can also get psychology from that too. And so the analogy that I was going to use, I thought you played guitar, you're a drummer. But if you take two guitars, let's say you take $100 Yamaha guitar, and let's say you take a $5,000 Martin guitar. Anybody who listens to the Yamaha next to the Martin will say, oh, that's better. But if you give that $100 guitar, you hand it over to Eric Clapton or Jimi Hendrix.
Yes.
You ain't going to know the difference.
Yes.
You ain't going to know the difference.
That's exactly right.
So they both do it, but one is better than the other. And I would say if I had to choose one feature about the Hindu Vedic, it's the dashas. The dashas are planetary periods. So you don't have this in the modern Western astrology. After Hindu Vedic came out, a few years later, Robert Hand said, you know what, we need to go to our roots. The same way the Hindus have gone, we're going to go back to the Latin and Greek astrology of hundreds of years ago. And they have there something called time lords, which is like the
perfections.
yeah, and this is like the dasha bhuktis in the Hindu. So in the Hindu system, there's Venus is a 20-year period.
I'm in a Venus period now.
So my Venus is horrific. I was born, even though it's a 20-year period, I was born into the last 4 years of the Venus period, and they were horrific. My mother was going crazy, literally, during my first 4 years of life. And these dashas go in order. You can be born in any dasha. You can be born in the beginning or the middle of a Mars dasha. The sun is 6 years. Then comes Moon, 10 years. Then Mars, 7 years. Then the North Node, Rahu, 18 years. And it goes like that. So depending upon how those planets are situated, you can understand what's going to happen. Now, one of the things when Donald Trump was elected president, I said, this guy's gotten away with everything his whole life. But he hit a Jupiter dasha at the start of his presidency. And I said, the law is, Jupiter is the law. I said, eventually, it may take time because he's got one of the strongest Jupiters you could have. It's stationary. When a planet's stationary and all the other planets are moving, it becomes very powerful. And Jupiter's in the money house. It's in the money house. So he was wealthy as an infant because as soon as he was born, his father used his account to do tax deals. And so as a 2 or 3 year old, he had a bank account of like $500,000. That's an illegal sort of way to do it. And he's always been wealthy. But because Jupiter is in Virgo, not a good sign for Jupiter. Jupiter rules Pisces. It's in its own sign in Pisces. So the opposite sign, Virgo, is very bad for Jupiter. So I said, at some point, the law is going to catch up with this guy. Now, it's been 4 years, but I still believe that the law, and some astrologers said, no, but he's so great and Jupiter is so strong. I said, I don't believe Jupiter will allow that to occur, for him to get away with it in the Jupiter Dasha. We'll see.
I also see that he has Neptune, transiting Neptune square in his Sun Moon opposition this spring. So I think the walls are going to start to crumble around him soon.
Well, they're already going after him with a vengeance.
But you know, the amazing thing about President number 45 is that his chart, people don't, it's almost uncomfortable to say it, especially as a black man, but he has a powerful chart. The man is a star as it relates to just pure energetically. He has this powerful energy in his chart that's undeniable. So people wonder how he's able to get away with so much, because from a Western point of view, he has this amazing, charismatic, powerful, proud, obstinate, radiant kind of chart. Does the Hindu system say the same thing?
So I thought I had sent you my book, the revised edition. I wrote 10 pages on Trump. Donald, and I say in this book, I say in that revised edition of Ancient Hindu, Donald Trump's chart for raw power is, I don't know how to say it, 5-10 times stronger than Hitler, Roosevelt, any of the presidents. I have never seen a horoscope with this much career raw power. And I spent about 2-3 pages just on the raw power of what this guy was able, with no political ability whatsoever, to get to the highest position in the world. He was able to take a party that prided itself on values and doing the right thing. And not only did he change it, he powerfully turned it on his upside on his head and succeeded. This guy has power. Now, you may not like the power. It's a terrible way to use power. And everything he has done, the United States said, we indict you. We demand that you do this. He said, get lost, get lost, get lost, get lost, and got away with it. Now, that's his power. When he said, I could shoot somebody and get away with it, I said, yes, this guy can do it. But as I said, in the 16 years of Jupiter Dasha, the law is probably going to catch up with him. The fact is, everybody in New York was aware he doesn't pay his contractors. The guy has had 3,500 lawsuits. He uses lawsuits to bully people.
Absolutely.
And you know, that's, but as soon as he got to the presidency, not just New York, but then the whole world got to see how he uses. And so that in itself is Jupiter saying, you're not going to get away. You know, at the very least, the world is going to know that you're a thief, that you bully people, that you don't play by the rules, you don't play by the laws. They know that now.
Absolutely.
Jupiter has made it so the world knows it, and he knows they know it. But I say it's going to go further. I say the law is actually going to get him.
I agree with you too. And I think it's soon because of Neptune. But enough of Trump. The value of this is that it shows in both systems that astrology deals with the fact that you can be born in any circumstance, and it depending on the time and the place of your birth, you have certain celestial strengths that give you the ability to overcome anything.
Well, okay, so here's another one of the sutras that I have is when you see a horoscope which is filled with problems and dilemmas and complexities and a difficult childhood and a dysfunctional childhood, one of the sutras is look for Pluto. Look at the Pluto aspects. You will notice that there's people like my oldest brother and myself. We had this crazy dysfunctional childhood, and somehow we got to adulthood without being drug addicts, without being alcoholics, and we've had reasonably successful lives. You also have people in a childhood like mine that are damaged forever. They're just damaged forever. They may become alcoholic, drug addicts, they may commit suicide because the childhood is too damaging. If Pluto is forming good aspects, they can rise above it. Pluto is a planet of regeneration. It regenerates the soul, it regenerates the cellular structure. Pluto rules nuclear bombs, it's energy, it's most intense energy. And it has to do with self-improvement and regenerating. So if a person has those Pluto aspects, it's as if it's a rough chart. I mean, if it's a powerful chart, they don't need Pluto because the chart is powerful enough. But the horoscope is a blueprint of the life. Once you are born, that is showing you the karma that that person is going to have throughout their life. That's what the horoscope is. It's a schedule and a blueprint.
Are you surprised at how many people don't use astrology still, or believe the hype against it?
No, why would I be surprised? The astrology that you see is mostly sun sign astrology. The sun sign is, powerful, but it's 1/50th of a chart. Not even really, it's 1,000th of a horoscope. I remember in my early days of astrology, there was a girl in my class. This was 1979, and she was so shy, timid, soft, and her sun sign was Aries. I said, how is this possible? The sun was conjunct with Neptune.
Exactly.
So it completely weakened, so the sun sign is one particular thing, but it also depends upon like if a person has had a professional reading by a good professional, they're going to believe astrology. But how many people have done that? Not that many.
Absolutely.
And on top of that, now with the internet, you have all these people, oh, hey, that's an easy way to make a living. I'm an astrologer, right? They read a couple of books and they become astrologers. Now with that, there could be plenty of people that have their charts read and say, yeah, I don't think it works.
Absolutely. So how do we give people a sense of confidence in a field where there's a lot of incompetence? What do we do that we can help move the compass forward? Because I actually believe that astrology is more precise than going to a psychologist, because you can get to core answers much more quickly than a psychologist. A psychologist will take 6 months to get to.
There is a Martin guitar and there is a Yamaha. Give me a good psychologist. They will sit with you for 20 or 30 minutes and they'll tell you all about your behavior from the first. You give them 20 minutes of what happened in your early year. So it depends. I mean, it's, if the astrologer is really good, it'll be great. If the psychologist is really good, they'll be great. I have found, the longer I live, I have found that there's a small percentage of people in every field, science, medicine, whatever field it is, the arts, there's a small percentage that are really, really fine and really great. And then there's a huge percentage that are average. And there's a big percentage that are just horrific. So I think that's in every field. But the answer to your question, what you do is you don't worry about anybody else, you worry about yourself.
Absolutely.
Okay. And what you do is you follow what works. If it works, if the techniques work 7 out of 10 times, you use them. When they don't work, you don't use them. You follow up to ask the clients, is this accurate? Did this work? And you do the best you can for yourself and then pass it on, teach it to others.
I appreciate that. So I want to go a little bit more personal now, because I mentioned in the beginning that you changed the trajectory of my life, because at the time I was getting a lot of pressure from my environment to
I remember.
I was putting,
and I said, no, absolutely. It is the arts. If music is your art, that's the Dharma. And I said, you can either do something to make money, you can do something to live somebody else's life, but if you want to die happy on your deathbed, you follow your Dharma. Dharma is the purpose. Now, one of the sutras that I have is that Dharma means duty or purpose. It's a Hindu term. Everybody has a Dharma. Now, the Dharma might not be so clear. Yours was clear. The Dharma might be to have numerous careers. It's whatever the horoscope indicates, but the Dharma comes from the heart. So if you're talking to a client and you can see the Dharma, right, whatever it is, but the person has no confidence, they have a very hard time getting to the Dharma. You say, well, your Dharma, it is indicated that you are an extremely creative, literary writer, communicator. That's the Dharma. Oh, I have no talent in that. Oh, I have no ability in that. That's what they'll tell you. And you say to them, I didn't ask whether you think that you have any ability. And I wouldn't ask in this case because there's no confidence. But I'm telling you, if you can go into your heart, this is what. So the Dharma comes from the heart. People know their Dharma intuitively because it springs from the heart. It's what they want to do. But if the confidence is very weak, they will not look at anything that requires them to say, I have a unique ability. They can't do it. So you have to work with them. And one of the things I'll say is, if a genie came down right now and had a wand and said, what talent would you like? What would you love to do? Oh, I'd love to be a rock star. Oh, I'd love to be a writer. Oh, I'd love to. They'll tell you what they love. But, you have to work with them. But otherwise, the Dharma, you see the Dharma in the horoscope, but the person knows the Dharma intuitively. It's a question of whether they can remember it, or like whatever you were going, you knew your Dharma, but there were all these things going on.
You liberated me. And I think that's the value of a great astrologer. I literally never looked back from that time. And that,
Lorenzo, if I tried to tell you the amount of people, I mean, I had this one guy, this one guy in Switzerland. I was in Switzerland. These people brought me to Switzerland to do astrology, and no, actually, I did his chart in Florida. He was visiting with his friends. I did his chart, and I said, "Are you an artist?" He said, "Art? No, I'm a hairdresser." I'm a hairdresser. I said, you got to start doing art. This is so artistic. This horoscope is great for the arts. Flash forward 5 years, the same Swiss people brought me to Switzerland, and they said, "Hey, let's go to so-and-so's house." I don't remember this guy from Adam. We go to his house, and there's really gorgeous art all over the walls. I say, "God, this is really nice. Did you do this?" And he looked at me quizzically, as if I would remember. He said, "You were the one that told me to do this." You know, and then I mean, there's so many stories of people that have changed professions because of what was in the horoscope.
and that's beautiful. And I'm happy to be in that tradition with you. And I must say, we looked at my chart early and saw the creativity in the arts, but recently we discovered the astrology in my chart. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that's something that I would not have noticed. So in astrology, I'm going to pull up your chart on the computer here just so you won't be able to see it, but I can see it. But this is something, sometimes you see things in astrology that where you miss it because it's just too complex, too complicated. So you have in a horoscope the houses. The 10th house is career, and the ruler of your 10th house is Mercury, and it's in the first house. So the career is connected to the physical presence or a performer, things like that. You have the planet of art in the house of art. That's Venus. You have the moon in the 10th house, which is a performer. So that's what I saw when I was doing your horoscope. Of course, I saw Saturn. Saturn is sitting right next to Ketu, and it's aspected by Mars. So I saw that, and I described what that might mean for Saturn in the 5th house with children or with creativity or whatever. When you suddenly started doing astrology, I said, what is this? This musician, this artist, why am I not seeing this in the horoscope? And again, it comes down to one of these sutras in the book, is that aside from the planets and the houses, each planet is known as a karaka, or an indicator. So the 7th house is marriage. And you look at the 7th house and the planets in the 7th house and the ruler of the 7th house and the aspects to the ruler of the 7th house. Everything about the 7th house will tell you about marriage. But Venus your 7th house is going to be different from someone else's 7th house. But Venus for everybody is the karaka, or the indicator of marriage. The same with children. So I had a horoscope a couple months ago. The 5th house was terrible. I don't see any children. There's no good aspects to the house of children, nothing. And she's got 1 or 2 fantastic children. Jupiter is the karaka, or the indicator of children. And Jupiter was exalted and aspected by Venus. So the karaka, or the indicator. So Saturn, your career house is Gemini. It's ruled by Mercury. Mercury's in the 1st house and all that. But the karaka of career for everybody is Saturn. Saturn is 11 degrees Capricorn. Ketu is 11 degrees Capricorn. Ketu, is known as the South Node in Western astrology, is everything psychic, metaphysical, astrological. I would not get this except after the fact. It's too difficult. There are times when I do see things like this, where I'll see the karaka. Like, for example, one of the things that I teach, everybody knows that the moon is the indicator of the mother. So you have your 4th house, which is mother, and the moon is the karaka, or indicator of the mother. So if the moon is in bad shape, it's going to cause problems, even if the 4th house is good, and vice versa. what very few astrologers remember is that Mercury is also a karaka for the mother. And so if Mercury is very devastated, it causes problems to the mother. And I started, when I was taught that, I didn't get that from Western astrology. In the West, it's just the moon, as far as I know. But in India, when they told me that, Mercury is a karaka of the mother? Where does that come from? As the years went by, I started to realize that Mercury is the nervous system. And you're in your mother's womb, you're getting her nervous system for 9 months. If her nervous system is shot to hell just because her life is difficult or she's genetically problematic with the nervous system, your Mercury is going to wind up in bad shape, and that's an indication. So there's a connection between Mercury and nervous system, and that's perhaps why Mercury is mother. Moon is nurturing. Mother is nurturing. It's obvious, but the Mercury is it was confusing.
That's amazing. And actually, my mother is a big influence, and I have Mercury very strongly aspected in my Hindu chart, so that makes a lot of sense. I want to ask you one more question before we go.
Okay.
In this great book, How to Be a Great Astrologer. By the way, how many books do you have? Because I have 6 of them. I have, in addition to these, I have the book with Sailor Bob, which was...
Oh, yes. Living Reality.
Yeah, and I have another one, a smaller one over there, too.
The Living Reality, oh, yeah. So this is the Living Reality, which is about enlightenment. I had a guru come to my house and teach non-duality for 5 weeks. It was wonderful. And this, Astrologos Revelations of a Hindu Astrologer. And look, I was young once.
So you have 6 books.
6 books, but I tell you what, I don't look at it like that anymore, because you see this book here, this revised and expanded edition. It's a new book. It took a year to do, and I got a review yesterday. I was so thrilled because people, I said, I'm going to spend a year, and people think it's just a revised book. It's a little bit different. I said, why am I doing this? It's financially stupid. The reviewer said, this is a new book. I look at it like 7. I love it. And the Braha Sutras is going to be 8.
I love that.
And remember, when I first went to India, I had an astrology reading. It was the first astrology reading that I paid for. And the guy says, you're going to write some books. Now, this is 1982. And I never had a thought of writing a book. And I wasn't an astrologer. I knew Western astrology, but I didn't practice. I didn't want to become an astrologer because Western astrology wasn't predictive enough. I just couldn't see doing it for me. So he says, you're going to write some books. I said, what? I was 31, 32. He says, you're going to write some books. I said, are you sure? He goes, yes. I said, how many? He says, a few, 5 or 6. I said, are you sure? He goes, yes. I said, are you positive? He goes, my dear friend, astrology is not an absolute science. I said, oh. And he said, but you will write books. And he was talking about Mercury, the planet of writing and teaching, in the 6th house, the house of work, aspected by a full moon. I was born not on the exact full moon, but like a day and a half later. So the moon was very, very bright, aspecting the Mercury. And Moon and Mercury are both mental planets. I was surprised by that. Mercury's the mind. Moon is the common sense and the memory. So when you get people with Moon Mercury conjunct, Moon Mercury opposite, you're getting people that are very mental and intellectual and all that. It's a wide aspect in my case. Mercury's 2 degrees, Moon is 23 degrees. It's a wide aspect, but that Moon is so full, and Mercury's in the house of daily work. So I wind up this, if you knew me in the first 23, 24 years of life, you go, this guy's going to have a mental career? No, I wanted to be a baseball player. I wanted to be a baseball player. I loved sports. Then I wanted to be an actor. I used to have nightmares in college and for many years that I was back in high school because of failing English, because I never went to I refused to read. I couldn't read these stupid Charles Dickens books. What does Mrs. Haversham have to do with me? Nothing. And now I love to read, but back then it was all physical. It was all, I had no idea I would have a mental career.
But you also have if I may just say one thing I know about your chart, you have a Taurus Moon, so you want to feel things that you can touch, not
Yeah.
necessarily.
I also have a Taurus ascendant.
Okay, there you go.
And in 1980, 1979, 80, I studied just a teeny bit with Isabel Hickey. Isabel Hickey has the best Western astrology book, or at least she did. I don't read the books anymore, but she had the best book on the market. She was 60 or 70. This is what you want. You want astrologers. Most astrologers write their books when they're 30 because they want to get famous. You want the astrologers to write their books when they're 60 and 70 when they know something. So she wrote her book when she was like 65 or 70. And so it was just a lifetime of knowledge in that book. It's called Astrology, a Cosmic Science.
Absolutely,
Still available.
one of the classics.
Anyway, she was doing my horoscope. The way it worked was I went to her class, right? And because she was famous, there were all these professional astrologers in the room. And then there were students that didn't know anything. And in her class, she'd put up a chart on the board and she'd go around the room and everybody would have to say something about the chart. Even if you knew nothing, she said, everybody has to say something, right? So they all do my chart. And some of the ones, my God, they're like professional astrologers talking about my horoscope. And then others that knew very little, oh, well, there's a planet in Libra, so blah, blah, blah. So then she says, she looks at it and she sees Moon in Taurus, Ascendant in Taurus, Sun, Mercury, Saturn, Neptune in Libra. So now you got 6 planets and the ascendant ruled by Venus. And she says, are you an artist? I say, no, I was an actor for some years, but you know, those planets ruling, when you talk about Taurus, that's the sweetest thing about my life is having all this Venus. And it's the most difficult because when you have too much Venus, you're always trying to please everybody else. And it's a nightmare. It's just, the other people like it, but it's hard.
Wow. So here's my last 2 questions. In here, how to be a great astrologer. You talk about the North and the South node in the Western system as being the greatest indicator of what your purpose is.
Right. But this doesn't mean you're going to do what the North Node says. It means that's what you should do.
Yes.
To gain evolution, fulfillment, etc.
Yes, it's the basis for my life purpose readings, by the way, in my practice. But why does the Western system have that as a powerful feature that stands out for you?
Because Isabel Hickey said, no, listen to this. Isabel Hickey said, she said, astrologers don't do enough with the nodes. They are the most important. I don't know if she said they were the most important or they are just extremely important. But when she, you know, I had been studying a little bit of Western astrology. I didn't have a lot of classes with her, but I had studied a little bit. When she said that, it touched something. You know, sometimes I'll hear a teacher say something and I'll say, that's crap. It doesn't make any sense. When she said that, I said, I think I knew that intuitively. I think I had a sense that the nodes were just incredibly important. It touched something. And there are books written on the nodes and stuff like that. But I think that she, you know, Isabel Hickey was enormously psychic. I mean, this woman she was almost not, at this age, 70, 75, whenever I saw her, she wasn't dealing with the normal rational mind. In fact, part of the funny story about this is that I only went to her class once, and she would put somebody's chart on the board, right? Each class, she'd put somebody's chart on the board. So I was having very, very mystical spiritual experiences at the time that I went to see her. And I went up on the break and I said, what happens to a person's horoscope when they gain enlightenment? She looked at me, she looked in my eyes, and she said, do you want to put your chart on the board? I said, oh, yes. She never answered the question. She was dealing on a psychic level, this woman.
I love it.
So this guy comes up to me afterwards. He says, dude, I don't think they used the word dude back then, but he said, I've been coming in this class for 3 years. I can't get my chart on the board. That's luck. That's karma.
Okay, so I want to tie all this together. The love of astrology, the fascination with how it can determine the trajectory of our lives, the idea that you have to have things that work consistently before you can say that they are true, or at least 70%, as you say. The power of the person to rise from their own circumstances and become something greater than their culture. And I know that you are a big fan of both baseball and Hank Aaron.
Oh.
This past, he was the person who broke Babe Ruth's home run record and had it for 25 years or so until a possibly steroid enhanced person.
What do you mean possibly?
Took it over.
Possibly? Come on.
I'm just trying to be political.
If you gave Hank Aaron steroids, he would have hit 900.
I'm just trying to be politically correct.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, okay.
So Hank Aaron is a great example of how you rise out of something that culturally you wouldn't be expected to, and he represents sort of this example of certain elements in the chart that take you to a place that is extraordinary. And I know you love him and you love
I don't know if you could see it, but as soon as you mentioned him, I got tears in my eyes. Do you know that?
Use astrology and just talk about Hank Aaron and talk about all of that and how it all comes.
Do you know that Hank Aaron got so disgusted of the racism and stuff before he was in the major leagues, and he went home. He said, I'm done with this. And he went home, and his brother said, go back. There's nothing here. Go back, because there's nothing. You're coming back. There's nothing to come back to here. He turned around and went back.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I've read every book that you can read. He was my hero as a kid. But Hank Aaron has a stationary Jupiter, and you know what's really amazing? His stationary Jupiter's in the house of money. Okay, now the planets of sports are Mars and Jupiter. So having a great Jupiter and a great Mars, that's the sports, and the fifth house is sports. But believe it or not, when Hank Aaron earned $300,000 in 1974, somewhere 300, he was the highest paid player in baseball at 300,000. But his chart is an amazing chart. But the thing about Hank Aaron's chart that, that aside from the sports and the fame and all that, was the character of this man. That's why the tears are here, because as an astrologer, I try to live the same kind of life of humility, of integrity, of honesty. This guy was, you look at his fifth house. He has Saturn in the fifth. I have Saturn in the fifth. The fifth house it's the mind, but it has so much to do with the character of the person. What I love about this guy was that this guy hit more home runs than anybody. And he said it himself. He said, when I hit a home run, I never looked at the fans. I never looked at the pitcher. You don't want to humiliate the guy that you just humiliated. He's already humiliated. You don't want him bearing down on you harder later. And also, it's just not the right thing to do. That's why I love Hank Aaron so much. And as a kid, we were Braves fans, my brothers, and we would watch every time they were on. We would watch the Braves, and it was his ability and yet his humility. And one of the sutras in the book is that to be a great astrologer, to be a great anything, Laurence Olivier, the greatest stage actor of the 20th century, said to be a great actor, you must have absolute confidence and absolute humility. Those two are very, very difficult. That's what you need. I strive for that. That's what Hank Aaron had. Absolute confidence. They said, weren't you scared when Don Drysdale threw the ball at your head? He said, no, I was never scared. And he did throw at his head. They threw at him. And they said, George Will, and then I got to go. George Will wrote a book called Men at Work. And he said he got all these all these pictures in a room. And he said, there's 6 pictures in the room. He said, I'm going to throw out a name. Willie Mays. You throw him low and outside. Mickey Mantle. Oh, you give him fastballs, but on the inside plate. Hank Aaron. Dead silence. And then this one pitcher says, just make sure that nobody's on base when he hits it out of the park.
I love you for this, man. I'm so thankful to have this time. I thank you for being a mentor to me. I thank you for your humility, your kindness, and your mastery as an astrologer. Can't wait for your book, the Braha Sutras, to come out. And thank you for this body of work.
I have to send you these other books, though. I
Yes,
thought I sent you.
Please do that. Please do that ASAP.
I will. It'll go out Monday or Tuesday.
Man, I love you. I appreciate you, and much success to you. Much continued success.
I love you back.
Hey, everybody. Once again, thank you for enjoying this episode. Thank you for being a part of this journey. James Braha is clearly a master. He's clearly someone who has a wealth of experience and humility and kindness and just the caring that goes into helping so many people for so many years. So I'm so grateful and thankful to have had his great energy with us, and I hope you got as much out of it as I did. And if you want a reading, you can contact us here at Astrologic Astrology. You can find us at our website, which is astrologicastrology.com. You can also reach us on YouTube, of course, and you can reach us on Instagram at Astrologic Astrology. We so appreciate having the opportunity to share this great information with you, and we look forward to more enlightening, informative presentations that make you more aware of who you are. Thank you again for being with us, and as always, we say goodbye with the Sanskrit word namaste. The spirit in me recognizes and honors the spirit in you.
Ba-da-ba.